about this in my most recent column. Los Angeles has become increasingly a city that tolerates inequality, that tolerates having hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people living in the city who don't have full legal status. And so I think that that movie and my novel are portrayals really, and they've endured now because that hasn't really changed about Los Angeles. And so that the war now has become our recent history. And there is also a very important process of reconstructing those societies that is moving along much quicker in some places like El Salvador and not so well in places like Guatemala where the institutions are very weak. And that's something that I think is a topic for Guatemalteco writers to take on. My novel is about the diaspora. And I think that one of the things that the war left us is the diaspora. And the diaspora has not been resolved. Diaspora is still a city of suffering. The diaspora is a city of injustice. And this is something that Central American society has to also deal with, because in El Salvador, El Salvador especially, but also in Guatemala, the diaspora is something that eats away at those countries' national identity. I think that's my observation, is that the fact that there are so many Guatemaltecos, so many El Salvadorans living abroad, and that has now become, it continues to be the main vehicle of social mobility for people, that undermines undermines Guatemalan and Salvadoran national identity. And that's something that those countries need to deal with as much as we do. And so, yeah, I think the resolution of what happened in the war, no, I mean, it's una situación muy confusa is the best way I can say it. It's just not something that's really been resolved, but it also opened up this other narrative that we're living, that we're part of. So, yes, another question. Yes?
Today is the 29th of April. It's exactly 17 years since the verdict on the Rodney King and the police that we got off, and that is the last couple chapters of your book. That's a scenario, including you have some young people in the streets. I guess they're gang members or whatever, but they're like standing up to the police. And it's kind of you get this atmosphere of kind of, and the very, very end. The rebellion is happening. People are breaking in to stores and stuff like that, and Antonio is thinking now: is this the right thing to do? Should I participate? Is it the right? And his answer is, I wish Elena, my wife, were here, because she would be able to tell me what to do. That was the thing that when I first read the book, I'm like, that relationship between him and Elena, and the fact that what he knew about political things he had learned from her. I guess my question is, what do you think Elena would have told him? The sequel to the tattoos.
No, I think that I really I think that he was someone. He says that. I think he says that because it represents his loss. He's lost part of who he is. And and for me I wanted to bring that back at that moment, because behind all of that happened, there were people who had suffered a certain kind of loss, whether it be separation from their homes, which brought them to Los Angeles, or this horrible war and violence that happened in Central America. And yes, I think that part of what we've lost, I've never really thought of it this way until you asked that question, but we lose a little part of we lose a little part, and I'm talking of us as a community, we lose a little part of our intellect when we leave one country and come to another, and we have to rebuild it, right? Because we're like newborn children in a place. We don't speak the language, we don't know the customs. And I think that is something that our community is now doing. And that maybe that's what that moment represents. It represents, we've lost something, we've lost a limb, we've been wounded. The scar is there. He has lost Elena. We have lost a direct connection to the cities and villages of our ancestors. hundreds of second, third, fourth, fifth cousins who live in Zacapa, Guatemala, who I've never and will never really meet. And so I've lost that connection. I come to Los Angeles, and me and people like me, we rebuild our identity. And so I think that now that I think about it, that's what, if I were to write a sequel, and I'm not going to, although I was thinking of giving Antonio a cameo in the novel that I'm writing right now, that it would be that. I mean, that's sort of like a theme that maybe for artistic and cultural exploration is our rebuilding our sense of ourselves in this new place. Question? Yes?
Right now, just what you were talking about rebuilding your identity. When you were speaking, I'm the daughter of Salvadoran immigrants, so this really hit home in a huge way when I read this. And when you were talking about rebuilding your identity, how was this, or was it a way of trying to gap those two just identities of your big Guatemalan and being an LA native?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think that's what I'm still trying to do. I wrestle with that in almost everything that I do, everything that I write. I wrote a column for yesterday's paper about day laborers, and I wanted to, part of what I do all the time is to invoke LA history, because that's something that I feel really comfortable with, and that I know that a new generation doesn't feel all that comfortable with, but it is really your history also. And so for me, that I think that part of the reason why I write, and it really is a very frustrating thing to do, I just can't emphasize that enough. Part of the reason why I write is to not surrender to that constant questioning, is to not, is because for me the process of writing is a process of construction, right? And I think that now, part of what we need to do as culture producers, because many of us here in this room, are going to be that one way or another, is to pull those threads together as much as we can. I was stunned the other day. I was in the metro, riding on the metro, our metro here, the Red Line, and I was sitting next to this guy, this young guy, shaved head, and he was sort of like watching me. I was working on my manuscript, and I'm scribbling, my manuscript. He goes, "Hey, are you a writer?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a writer." He goes, "Oh man, that's pretty cool." And he said, "What do you write?" I said, "Well, I'm writing a book, and I write for the newspaper, and I just wrote this column about this guy who had been in a gang, who was now in a wheelchair, and he went to university and everything." He goes, "Yeah, I read that." And he started quoting the story to me. So we get in this conversation, because he's read my newspaper story. I find out he's from El Salvador. And he says to me, "Yeah, my family's from El Salvador, but my dad told me something about a war, but I don't know who was fighting. What was it all about?" He's like 21, 22 years old. He doesn't know about his own country's history. So I got his name and his number. This was several months ago, and I thought one day I'm going to track him down, and I'm going to get a whole bunch of DVDs. And I'm going to play them for him. I'm going to say, "This is your country. This is like what your parents were running away from. This is what the FMLN was. They were really tough dudes. They built an army from scratch. I went recently when I was the Mexico City bureau chief. I went to El Salvador to do a story, and I got to walk in Morazan. And this is one of the great untold stories, really untold in the sense of we don't really appreciate it. We think we know, okay, FMLN, Salvadoran history, but the nuts and bolts of building a guerrilla movement, bringing together very campesinos, bringing together university students and some, foreigners and Venezuelans, and what they did up there in those Pine Mountains is one of the great stories of the 20th century, and it's something that we should pass on and heredar to, that's part of who we are. And there isn't really, the thing is that we sort of take it for granted, even if we're sort of educated people, but really it is a deep, rich vein that we need to sort of cultivate and pass on, to people. So, other question?
Have you thought about bringing out a collection of what you consider to be your best columns?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, he said, have I considered bringing out a collection of what I consider my best columns? So I've only been writing a column since December. But I think in terms of my newspaper reporting, there's a lot of newspaper reporting that I'm very proud of, even though it's sort of mediated. I'm really glad I get to go to university. I get to use the word mediated. What I write for the newspaper is mediated through this capitalist enterprise. You know, it's what it is. It's a capitalist enterprise. It's an advertising vehicle. Now we see advertising on the front page. We're reminded of what we really are. And it's the newspaper is a very